You hear them chanting your name. Except it's not really your name. It's the name they gave you, the one that fits better on posters and betting slips. You're standing in the dark, behind a gate that smells like rust and fear. You clutch the handle of a dull sword, one that's already bent at the tip. Your body aches, your mind races. And right before the doors open, the man beside you whispers, "Don't die too fast. They paid for a show." That's when it hits you. This isn't a battle. It's not even justice. It's a performance. And you're the main act. Forget the Hollywood version. There is no Maximus here. No justice, no honor. The truth? Being a gladiator in ancient Rome was like starring in your own snuff film. Except you didn't get paid, and you didn't choose the script. You were bought, branded, brutalized. All so some bored senators could feel alive for 5 minutes by watching you die slowly. And if you think this was just ancient sports, let's put it this way. It was like the Super Bowl, if the losing team was disemboweled on live TV. Still romanticizing the Colosseum? Let's take a walk through the real story. Not the marble one, the blood-soaked one. And hey, if at any point this story feels too brutal to be real, go ahead and hit subscribe, leave a comment, and let me know which part made you stop and say, "There's no way that actually happened." Because trust me, it did. Your gladiator journey didn't begin in an arena. It began in a warehouse. Somewhere outside Rome, in the stink of wet straw and iron chains, you were naked, shackled, lice-ridden, and waiting to be sold. You see, gladiators weren't chosen, they were taken. Prisoners of war, criminals, enslaved men, or just unlucky souls whose debts outweighed their dignity. Some were volunteers, but calling them that is like calling a man who jumps off a burning ship a swimmer. The market? It wasn't subtle. You were paraded around like meat at a farmer's market, poke-tested, gawked at, auctioned off based on muscle tone and teeth. Men shouted prices while sipping wine. Children laughed as you were prodded with sticks. Women bet on how long you'd last. There were no names, only labels. This one's Numidian, strong legs, fast reflexes. That one's Germanic, big build, but slow. This one already killed a man, twice the price. You weren't a person. You were a potential spectacle. And in Rome, the more violently you could die, the more valuable you were. If a lanista, a gladiator trainer, bought you, congratulations. You were going to Eludus, the training school, which sounds quaint until you learn what training meant. Imagine military boot camp. Now subtract food, sleep, and consent. Add whips. Add branding irons. Add wooden swords that left real bruises. You were starved to build desperation, beaten to kill hesitation, taught to perform pain beautifully. And don't think you got a say in any of it. Even your name was gone, replaced with something more dramatic, more marketable. They didn't want Marcus from Gaul. They wanted the Wolf of the West or the Butcher of Thrace. You were now a character in a play you couldn't quit. The worst part? You weren't even supposed to survive. No one trained you to win. They trained you to entertain. Because a fast death was boring, but a slow, bloody, gasping collapse, that's what sold tickets. You were expected to bleed artistically, to fall like a god, to die with flair. And if you didn't, There was always another slave in the cage behind you, waiting for your costume. So yes, the Colosseum was impressive. Yes, the architecture was a marvel. But behind every arch and column was a story like yours, one of humiliation, branding, and blood on marble floors. And before you ever swung a sword, you were already being consumed by the system, by the crowd, by the story they needed you to tell.
Welcome to the Ludus, which sounds like a prestigious academy until you realize the diploma is a wooden sword and a slightly delayed death. The Ludus wasn't a school. It was a factory, a place where human bodies were shaped, sharpened, and eventually shattered. You were drilled from dawn until your feet bled, muscles torn, rebuilt, torn again. You trained in heat. You trained in chains. You trained with wooden weapons so heavy they made your real sword feel like a toothpick. But make no mistake, this wasn't to protect you. It was to prolong the fight. Because a dead gladiator is only interesting for 5 seconds. But a wounded, gasping, crawling gladiator? Now that's good theater. Your trainer, the lanista, wasn't your coach. He was your director. And every move you learned wasn't for victory. It was for the crowd. The twist of the blade, the arc of your fall, the way you clutched your stomach before collapsing, all rehearsed. You weren't being prepared to survive. You were being choreographed to die beautifully. And here's the punchline. The Romans believed they were civilizing you, that by turning you into a performer of violence, they were lifting you out of your barbarian past, as if murder with flair was a form of enlightenment. Sure, he's a slave, but did you see that pirouette before his spleen ruptured? Elegant. And don't let the gladiator brotherhood myths fool you. Sure, you trained together, but you also knew only one of you would walk out alive. So camaraderie, that was for statues and storybooks. In the real Ludus, trust was a liability. You shared meals with the same men you'd one day gut in front of a cheering crowd. The only real companionship you had was the man digging your grave, just in case. And every day you wondered, will tomorrow be the day I'm picked? Not for a promotion, not for a prize, but for the show. To be hauled out like meat, oiled and armored, to perform a play with no ending, only exits. So yes, you were stronger now, faster, sharper, but don't confuse skill with freedom. You were a weapon, nothing more. And your blade wasn't yours. It belonged to the crowd, to the emperor, to the machine of spectacle that turned your agony into applause. Because in Rome, pain wasn't a tragedy, it was a commodity. And you were almost
Ready to sell. All that remained now was to prove your worth in blood. So, let's say you survive. Not just once, but again and again and again. The crowd starts to remember you. They chant your name. Little kids carve your face into wax dolls. Housewives gossip about your abs. Senators mention you at dinner parties like your dessert. You've become what every influencer dreams of. Famous. And just like influencers, you're now stuck. Because the one thing worse than being ignored in Rome was being noticed. You see, a nameless gladiator was a tool, but a famous one? That was politics. Now your victories embarrass nobles, your popularity threatens senators, and emperors? Oh, they hate sharing attention. One wrong word, one too loud cheer, one poem written about you in the wrong tone. Boom, you're no longer a hero, you're a rival. Take Spartacus. Yes, that Spartacus. The guy who was so famous, his name became a Netflix category. He didn't just get strong, he got popular. So what did Rome do? They sent 8 legions to kill him. That's 50,000 troops for a guy with a sword and a dream. Because in Rome, when your fame grows bigger than your cage, they burn the cage. And even if you kept your head down, fame was still a curse. Why? Because Rome is a place where everyone's watching and everyone's waiting. Waiting for you to slip, to age, to lose, to say something dumb in a banquet. Fame wasn't freedom, it was a countdown. Think being a celebrity today is brutal? Try being one in a system where a bad performance doesn't get you canceled, it gets you stabbed. Imagine being a mix of LeBron James, Tom Cruise, and a death row inmate. That's the job description. You're a mascot of masculinity, a puppet for the powerful, and a corpse in training with great pecs. Even your merch came at a cost. Did you know they used gladiator sweat as perfume? Yeah, they scraped it off your bleeding body and sold it to rich women as liquid virility. Let that sink in. You survived a tiger attack, only to be bottled and dabbed behind someone's ears. So yes, you're famous, but your fame isn't yours. It's theirs. And when they're done with it, when the crowd moves on, you don't fade out gracefully. You vanish into a grave with no name. Or worse, one last show where you lose on purpose for the thrill of watching a god fall. Because in Rome, legends weren't retired. They were executed for plot development.
So you finally died. Congrats. Sword to the gut, neck snapped, eaten by a leopard with taxidermy eyes and bad aim. It's over. Right? Wrong. Because in Rome, dying wasn't the end of the show. It was just another act. First, your body isn't going to a quiet grave. It's going on display. Maybe strung up on a hook outside the arena. Maybe paraded through the streets like a bloody trophy. If you were really popular, some noble might even throw a funeral in your honor, with a wax statue of you doing your signature death pose. Classy. And don't expect dignity. Your corpse might be burned alive, if they saved that for the finale, dissected in front of medical students who think ethics is a Greek island, or simply tossed into a pit with a bunch of other used-up meat puppets. They called it a spoliarium, a room where gladiators' bodies were dumped like trash after the show. Because even in death, you weren't a person, you were inventory. And if you were a slave, your owner might charge the arena for the damage, as if your death broke a valuable vase. Imagine dying and someone sends an invoice for your shattered rib cage. Rome didn't do closure. Rome did paperwork. We like to think we treat our athletes and heroes better today. Do we? Just look at the headlines when a star dies. The tributes, the montages, the merch surge. And the next day, we move on. Fame is consumption. Even the dead are content. Rome just didn't bother pretending otherwise. But there's a twist. Because some gladiators refused to stay dead. Their names lived on, etched into walls, whispered in alleys, carved into gravestones that somehow survived empires. One gladiator, Flamma,
was offered freedom 4 times and refused it. Why? Because he knew something most of us don't. In Rome, dying famous was the only way to live forever. So no, death wasn't the end. It was a career move, a branding opportunity. One last scream to remind the world, I existed, I bled, I mattered. And in a world built on violence, sometimes the loudest legacy was silence. So, let's rewind a day. You were dragged into a training camp, branded, beaten, and fed barley until your sweat turned to paste. You fought in rigged battles, cheered by strangers who couldn't remember your name. You dodged poison, politics, and predators. And finally, you died. Beautifully, painfully, and on schedule. All so some drunk patrician could feel like a god for 10 seconds. Still think being a gladiator was badass? It was worse than death, because death is final. Being a gladiator was ongoing dying. Every punch, every wound, every betrayal was just rehearsal for your final scene. You didn't live to fight. You fought to survive the living. And don't kid yourself. You wouldn't have made it. Not a day. Not with your ergonomic chairs, your HR departments, your Yelp reviews. Not with your emotional boundaries and personal space and I don't vibe with violence energy. You think your last family Thanksgiving was intense? Try sitting across from a guy who crucified his accountant for mispronouncing his dog's name, while pretending the peacock liver is delicious and the vomit bucket is just tradition. Because Rome wasn't built in a day, but you'd be unbuilt in 10 minutes. And if you're thinking, okay, maybe I couldn't be a gladiator, but at least I'd survive the party, you've clearly never been stabbed with a salad fork for laughing too hard at Nero's joke. So next time you romanticize ancient Rome, just remember, the marble was soaked in blood, the statues watched men die, and every cheer in the Colosseum was bought with a scream. Thanks for surviving this far. If you made it through without vomiting, fainting, or spontaneously combusting from historical trauma, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and let me know. Would you rather fight in the arena or dine with the emperor? Either way, you wouldn't leave whole. See you in the next historical nightmare. And remember, in Rome, no one died for free.